Let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support this channel. Your support means the world to us.
The sun was setting behind the hills of Agbowo village, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold. The air was thick with the aroma of roasted corn and the chatter of neighbors returning from the farm. It was a typical evening, one of those that I had grown to love during my annual visits to my grandmother's home. My grandma, Mama Abeni, was the backbone of our family. She was the epitome of wisdom, grace, and strength. At 75, her wrinkled face carried the stories of generations, and her words were filled with lessons that resonated deeply with everyone. Yet, I had always felt there was something more to her, a mystery that lurked beneath her kind eyes and warm laughter. This year, however, something changed. A chance discovery in an old wooden trunk would unravel a secret that had been buried for over 5 decades, shaking the foundation of everything we thought we knew about her. The attic had always been a forbidden zone, a dusty labyrinth filled with relics of the past. It smelled of mildew and old wood, and the air seemed heavier up there, as though it carried the weight of forgotten memories. It was my cousin Teyo's idea to tackle the attic. We had finished our other chores early, and boredom had begun to gnaw at us. "Come on, it will be fun," he said, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Grandma had been unusually stern when she gave us the attic key. "Clean it," she said, her voice broken no argument, "but leave the big trunk at the far end alone." Her tone was so sharp, it silenced even Teyo's usual retorts. Of course, that made us even more curious. The attic was a treasure trove of randomness. We found faded calendars, rusted lanterns, and bundles of newspapers that dated back to the 1950s. But the big trunk was what held our attention. It sat in the darkest corner of the attic, half hidden beneath a faded cloth. The trunk was unlike anything else in the room. Its iron clasps were rusted, and its edges were etched with intricate carvings that looked like they belonged to a bygone era. Why would she tell us not to open it if it wasn't important? Teyo said, grinning as he knelt in front of it. "Maybe it's dangerous," whispered Kemi, the youngest and most cautious of us. "Or maybe it's treasure," I offered, though my heart was thudding. Teyo didn't wait for further discussion. With a decisive yank, he opened the lid, and a cloud of dust rose like a spirit escaping its prison. Inside, the trunk was filled with objects that seemed ordinary at first glance, bundles of letters tied with frayed ribbons, faded photographs, and a leather-bound journal that looked fragile enough to crumble in our hands. "What's in the journal?" Kemi asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated before picking it up. The leather cover was worn smooth, and the scent of aged paper filled the air as I opened it to the first page. The handwriting was delicate yet firm, unmistakably grammar's. I began to read aloud, December 12, 1973. "Today, I saw him again under the baobab tree. His voice carries like the wind, and his smile feels like sunlight after the rain. His name is Adewale." The name hung in the air like an unspoken truth, unfamiliar yet heavy with meaning. "Who's Adewale?" Kemi asked, her wide eyes darting to Teyo. "No idea," Teyo replied, leaning closer. "But I bet it's someone Grandma didn't want us to know about." A shiver ran down my spine. The journal seemed to hum with secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just opened a door that couldn't be closed. For the next hour, we combed through the trunk's contents, piecing together fragments of a life we hadn't known Grandma had lived. Each photograph, each letter, each page of the journal hinted at a story far removed from the Grandma we thought we knew. "Should we tell her we found this?" Kemi asked, clutching a faded photograph of a young woman, Grandma, but not as we had ever seen her. She was laughing, her arms entwined with a man whose face was obscured by time. "No," Teyo said firmly. "Not yet. Let's find out what this is first." I closed the journal, my fingers tingling as though they had been burned. "I think this is bigger than anything we expected." As we left the attic, the weight of what we had uncovered followed us like a shadow. We didn't know it yet, But we had just cracked open a secret that would rewrite our family's history and change our lives forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. The journal burned in my mind, its secrets dancing in the shadows of my room. Who was Adewale? Why had Grandma never mentioned him? And why did her words carry so much longing, so much sadness? The next morning, I woke before dawn and quietly retrieved the journal from the hiding place under my bed. While my cousin still slept, I opened it to the second entry, eager yet apprehensive. December 15, 1973. Adewale came to the market today. His laughter rang out above the crowd, and I couldn't help but smile when I heard it. He saw me, too, and for a moment, the world stood still. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't stop myself. He feels like a song I've been waiting to hear my whole life. Her words were like poetry, vivid and alive. I could picture her as a young woman, standing at the bustling village market, her heart racing as she locked eyes with this mysterious man. The entries unfolded like a forbidden love story. Grandma, Mama Abeni to us, was a spirited, headstrong woman in her youth. She described how she had first met Adewale under the baobab tree near the riverbank. He was a traveling musician, his voice as smooth as honey, his charm impossible to resist. I told myself to stay away, she wrote in one entry. But my feet betrayed me, leading me back to the tree every evening. He was always there, waiting, his guitar resting on his knee. His songs weren't just melodies, they were stories, promises, dreams. Each encounter seemed more enchanting than the last. Grandma wrote about how they'd sit for hours, hidden by the shade of the baobab tree, talking about everything and nothing. Adewale spoke of his dreams of traveling the world, of performing for kings and queens. Grandma spoke of her duties to her family, of the weight of tradition pressing down on her shoulders. But their love was forbidden. Adewale was from Olekuta, a neighboring village with a long history of rivalry with Agbo. The tensions between their villages were deeply rooted, and any connection between them was seen as betrayal. Still, Grandma couldn't stay away. He made me feel alive, she wrote. Like I was more than just a daughter, a sister, a future wife to a man I hadn't even met yet. With him, I was free. The journal grew more intense with each page. The secrecy of their meetings added a dangerous thrill, but also a heavy sense of dread. January 7, 1974. They are starting to notice. My brothers have been asking why I've been disappearing in the evenings. Mama says I've been too distracted lately. They don't know, but I'm afraid they will soon. And if they find out about Adewale, the entry ended abruptly, as though the words were too painful to write. I paused, my mind reeling. Grandma had always been so composed, so grounded. The idea of her sneaking out to meet a forbidden love felt like a dream, a story that didn't belong to the woman I knew. The next entry revealed the stakes of their love. January 15, 1974. Adewale says we should run away together. He wants to leave this place, to start over somewhere no one knows us. He says we could be happy, but how can I leave my family? How can I leave everything I've ever known? He doesn't understand, he's never had roots like mine. But oh, how I want to go with him. I could feel the pull of her emotions, the impossible choice she was facing. Duty versus desire. Family versus freedom. My heart ached for her, but there was also a growing sense of unease. What had happened to Adewale? Why had Grandma stayed behind? I didn't realize I was crying until I felt a tear slide down my cheek. Wiping it away, I closed the journal and tucked it back under my bed. The story wasn't just about Grandma's past, it was about all of us. About the choices we make, the sacrifices we endure, and the secrets we carry. But the journal was only the beginning. There were still letters and photographs in the trunk, and I was determined to uncover the full truth. Little did I know, the answers I sought would reveal a tragedy that had been buried for 50 years, a tragedy that would shake our family to its core. The air felt heavier as I flipped through the journal's next entries, each one more desperate than the last. Grandma's love story with Adewale was reaching a breaking point, and her words seemed to pulse with fear and longing. February 2, 1974. I can't sleep. Every shadow feels like an accusation, every sound like a warning. My brothers have been watching me closely, and I know they suspect something. Adewale tells me to be brave, to trust him, but how can I? The walls are closing in, and I don't know how much longer I can keep this secret. The word struck me like a knife. Grandma, the woman who had always seemed so strong and fearless, had once been trapped in a nightmare of her own making. One entry, dated a week later, revealed just how high the stakes had become. February 9, 1974. It's over. They know. I don't know how, but they know. Mama's eyes were full of disappointment when she called me into the house tonight. My brothers were waiting, their faces like stone. Who is he? They demanded. I tried to deny it, but they wouldn't listen. I've betrayed them, they said. I've brought shame to our family. Her words painted a vivid picture of the confrontation, the anger, and the heartbreak. Her brothers had forbidden her from ever seeing Adewale again, threatening dire consequences if she disobeyed. But Grandma wasn't ready to give him up. February 11, 1974. I told him everything. We met under the baobab tree, and I poured out my heart. He held my hands, his eyes fierce with determination. Run away with me, he said. Tonight. We'll leave this place and never look back. His voice was like a lifeline, pulling me toward a future I could barely imagine. But I couldn't say yes. My family is my word, even if they don't understand me. How can I leave them? How can I leave Mama? The next entry was the shortest yet, just a single line written in shaky handwriting. February 12, 1974. He's gone. My chest tightened as I read the words. What had happened? Where had he gone? I turned the page and found the answer, a painful, heartbreaking answer that made me feel like I was intruding on a grief too private to share. February 13, 1974. He begged me one last time. He said he'd wait for me under the baobab tree until midnight. I wanted to go. I almost did. But when I looked at Mama's face, at the weight of her expectations, I couldn't move. I stayed in my room, listening to the clock tick away the minutes. When the morning came, I went to the tree. He was gone, just like he said he would be. The final entry in this chapter was dated a week later. February 20, 1974. They killed him. My brothers killed him. The words were smudged, as though she had been crying as she wrote them. My hands trembled as I read on. They followed him that night, ambushed him on the road out of the village. They said they were protecting our honor, that they were saving me from ruin. But they didn't save me. They broke me. I can still hear his voice, the song he sang for me under the baobab tree. It's all I have left of him now. I closed the journal, my heart pounding in my chest. Adewale hadn't just left, he had been taken from her in the most brutal way imaginable. For the first time, I understood why Grandma had always seemed so strong, so unshakable. She had carried this pain for 50 years, bearing it so deeply that no one, not even her children, had ever suspected the truth. But now that I knew, I couldn't ignore it. I had to confront her, to ask her why she had kept this secret for so long. Little did I know, the confrontation would reveal even more shocking truths that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The journal felt heavier in my hands now, as if the weight of Grandma's secrets had somehow seeped into the pages. I sat on the veranda, staring at the baobab tree swaying in the distance. The same tree that had once been a sanctuary for love was now a silent witness to betrayal and loss. Teyu and Kemi joined me, their faces pale from the revelations I had shared. The three of us sat in a tense silence, the reality of Adewale's death hanging between us like a storm cloud. "We have to tell Grandma," I finally said, my voice barely a whisper. Kemi clutched my arm. "Are you sure? What if she gets angry? What if this hurts her?" "Keeping it a secret doesn't make it any less true," I replied, my resolve hardening. "She deserves to know we've found the journal. And maybe it's time she tells us the rest of the story." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we approached Grandma. She was sitting in her favorite wicker chair, knitting a scarf. Her hands moved methodically, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as we stood before her. "What is it?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to slice through the tension. I stepped forward, clutching the journal tightly. "Grandma, we found this in the trunk." Her hands froze mid-stitch. For a moment, she said nothing, her eyes fixed on the journal as if it were a ghost from her past. Then she sighed deeply and set her knitting aside. "Bring it here," she said, her voice calm but resigned. I handed her the journal, and she held it as though it were a fragile, sacred relic. Her fingers traced the edges of the worn leather cover, and when she opened it, a tear slipped down her cheek. "I never wanted anyone to read this," she said, her voice trembling. "Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want you to carry the burden I've carried all these years." Teo couldn't hold back. "Grandma, we know about Adewale. And what happened to him?" Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sorrow. "You know? We know everything," Kemi said softly. "But there's more, isn't there?" For a long time, Grandma sat in silence, the journal resting in her lap. Finally, she looked up at us, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "There is more," she said. "And if you're ready to hear it, I will tell you." We nodded, bracing ourselves for whatever was to come. Grandma took a deep breath and began. "After Adewale was killed, I thought my life was over. I blamed myself for his death. If I had just left with him that night, he might still be alive. But it wasn't just guilt I carried, I was also carrying his child." The words hit us like a thunderclap. "Wait," Teo stammered. "Are you saying?" Grandma nodded. "Adewale and I had a son. His name is Eo." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Uncle Eo. The stoic, quiet man we had known our entire lives. He was Adewale's son. "I kept my pregnancy a secret," Grandma continued. "Only my mother and the midwife knew. When I gave birth, we told everyone that Eo was your grandfather's child. It was the only way to protect him. If anyone had known the truth," she trailed off, shaking her head. "What about Grandpa?" I asked. "Did he know?" Grandma's gaze softened. "Your grandfather was a good man. He knew Eo wasn't his, but he never said a word. He loved Eo as his own, and for that, I will always be grateful to him." Teo leaned forward, his voice filled with awe and confusion. "But why didn't you ever tell Uncle Eo the truth? Doesn't he deserve to know who his real father is?" Grandma's hands trembled as she clutched the journal. "I wanted to tell him. So many times, I wanted to tell him. But every time I tried, I remembered what my brothers did to Adewale. I couldn't bear the thought of reopening old wounds, of dragging Eo into the pain and violence of the past. I thought I was protecting him by keeping the secret." Her voice broke, and tears streamed down her face. "But now, I see that keeping this secret has hurt us all. And it's time for the truth to come out." We sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words settling over us. Grandma had carried this secret for 50 years, sacrificing her own happiness to protect her family. But in doing so, she had also kept us from knowing the full truth of who we were. "We need to tell Uncle Eo," I said finally, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my heart. Grandma nodded slowly, her eyes filled with both sorrow and relief. "Yes," she said. "It's time." The next evening, The house was heavy with tension as we prepared to share Grandma's revelation with Uncle Eo. The air felt thick, the usual chatter of our bustling family home replaced by an uneasy silence. Grandma sat in her chair, her fingers nervously twisting the corner of her shawl. When Uncle Eo arrived, he was his usual self, calm, composed, with a presence that seemed to steady everyone around him. He looked at us with mild curiosity, sensing the strange atmosphere. "What's going on?" he asked, setting his bag down and taking a seat. I glanced at Grandma, who nodded silently. Taking a deep breath, I retrieved the journal from the table and handed it to him. "Uncle Eo, there's something you need to read," I said, my voice shaking. He raised an eyebrow but took the journal without a word. The room was so quiet that the sound of the pages turning felt deafening. We watched as his eyes scanned the entries, his expression unchanging at first. Then, as he reached the later chapters, his face began to shift. His brow furrowed, his lips tightened, and his breathing grew heavier. When he reached the entry where Grandma revealed her pregnancy, he froze. His hands trembled as he closed the journal and set it on the table. Slowly, he looked up at Grandma. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice low and strained. Grandma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "It's true, Eo. Adewale was your father." For a moment, he said nothing. His gaze drifted to the floor, then to the baobab tree visible through the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a mix of confusion, anger, and pain. "All my life, I felt like I didn't belong. Like there was something different about me. And now I know why." He looked back at Grandma, his eyes blazing with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me live my entire life not knowing who I really was?" Grandma reached out to him, her hands trembling. "I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid. Afraid of how the truth would change everything. I thought I was protecting you, but now I see that I was wrong." Eo stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He began pacing the room, his movements sharp and agitated. "Protecting me," he said bitterly. "You think hiding my father's identity was protecting me? You think letting me live a lie was for my benefit?" Kemi tried to step in. "Uncle Eo, please don't be too harsh. Grandma thought she was doing the right thing, she lied to me." Eo snapped, his voice echoing through the room. "My whole life, I've looked up to her, trusted her. And now, I find out that everything I thought I knew about myself is a lie." Grandma's sobs filled the silence that followed. "I'm so sorry, Eo," she whispered. "I can't change the past, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday." Eo stopped pacing and turned to her, his face softened but still etched with pain. "I don't know if I can, Mama. Not right now." With that, he grabbed his bag and walked out of the house, leaving us all in stunned silence. For days, Eo didn't return, and the house felt emptier without him. Grandma was inconsolable, retreating to her room and barely speaking to anyone. We tried to comfort her, but nothing seemed to help. Then, one morning, Eo returned. He stood in the doorway, looking tired but resolute. In his hand, he held a small, worn notebook. "I found this in my old things," he said. "It's a song I wrote years ago, inspired by a melody I didn't even realize I knew. Now I understand, it must have been from him. From Adewale." He sat down across from Grandma, his gaze steady. "I've been thinking a lot about what you told me. I'm angry, yes. But I also know you've carried this secret for so long, and I can't imagine how much it's cost you." Grandma wiped her eyes, her voice trembling. "It cost me so much, Eo. But it was worth it, because it gave me you." Eo nodded slowly. "I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you, but I want to understand. I want to know who my father was. I want to know about him from you." The room filled with a sense of relief as Grandma began to share stories about Adewale, the way he used to sing under the baobab tree, the dreams he had of traveling the world, and the love they had shared despite the odds. As she spoke, Eo listened intently, his expression softening. He asked questions, hung on her every word, and for the first time, they began to bridge the gap that had opened between them. By the end of the evening, something had shifted in our family. The truth, though painful, had brought a new sense of connection. Eo began to explore his heritage, traveling to Adewale's village and meeting his surviving relatives. He even started learning the traditional songs that his father had once sung. As for Grandma, she seemed lighter, as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She smiled more, laughed more, and embraced her family with a newfound sense of gratitude. The revelation, though shocking, became a turning point for us all. It was a reminder that the truth, no matter how difficult, had the power to heal. One quiet afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden light through the windows of the family home, I sat with Grandma on the veranda. She looked peaceful but contemplative, her hands resting on her lap as she gazed toward the baobab tree in the distance. "I never thought the truth would set me free," she said softly, breaking the silence. "For so many years, I was afraid of what would happen if the world knew. But now, I see that secrets don't protect anyone, they only keep us prisoners." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of decades of pain and sacrifice. "Grandma," I said, "your story didn't just change our family, it changed everything. The school, the villages coming together, Uncle Eo finding himself, none of that would have happened if you hadn't shared your truth." She smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "Perhaps. But the real strength came from all of you, the way you embraced the truth, even when it was difficult. That's what gives me peace now." That evening, the family and the villagers gathered under the baobab tree for a special ceremony. Uncle Eo stood on the stage, his guitar slung across his shoulder. "This song," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "is for my mother and my father. For their love, their sacrifice, and their truth." He began to play, and the melody was hauntingly beautiful, a blend of the old and the new, of Adewale's music and Eo's unique voice. The lyrics told the story of a forbidden love, of a woman who had endured impossible choices, and of a family that had found strength in truth. As Eo sang, the crowd swayed, some with tears streaming down their faces. Grandma, seated in the front row, closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When the song ended, Eo stepped off the stage and knelt before Grandma. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking, "thank you for everything. For your courage, your love, and your sacrifice." Grandma reached out, placing a trembling hand on his cheek. "You are my greatest blessing, Eo. And your father, he would be so proud of the man you've become." The two embraced, and the crowd erupted in applause, not just for the performance but for the moment, for the love and healing it represented. In the months that followed, Grandma's health began to decline. She spent most of her days sitting by the baobab tree, surrounded by family, children from the school, and the music she loved. One crisp morning, she passed away peacefully in her sleep, a serene smile on her face. We buried her beneath the baobab tree, beside a plaque that read, "Here lies Abeni, a woman who loved deeply, sacrificed greatly, and lived fully." At her funeral, Uncle Eo played her favorite song, the one Adewale had written for her all those years ago. The melody carried through the air, a final farewell to a woman whose life had been defined by love and resilience. Eo's music gained recognition far beyond the village, spreading messages of unity and hope. But no matter how far his songs traveled, he always returned to Agbowo, to the baobab tree, to the legacy his mother and father had left behind. In the end, Grandma's secret was no longer a source of pain or shame. It became the foundation of something beautiful, a legacy that would live on for generations, a testament to the strength of love and the courage it takes to embrace the truth.
If you enjoyed our stories, please support us by subscribing to our channel and let us know your thoughts about the story. Did you enjoy it? Up next, a lawyer and a photographer caught between love, danger, and the streets of Lagos.